Another victim of the Long Island Railroad disaster was E.A. Buck, an editor at a publication called Spirit of the Times, which had been around since 1820, as described by PhilSP.com. Originally a sports and humor magazine, but ran increasingly more short stories, especially tales of the frontier, superseded by the Spirit of the Times and Sportsman, retitled Wilkes' Spirit of the Times from 1861 to 1902. Scholar Norris Yates' essay on the Spirit of the Times describes it as the leading sporting magazine in the United States, as well as the chief national outlet for humorous writers of the Big Bear School for approximately a generation. Although edited and published in New York City, this periodical drew contributions from hundreds of amateur authors in every state and territory of the growing nation as well as abroad. The Big Bear School, or the Big Bear School of Southern Humorists, refers to stories by Southern writers that could be called tall tales. Reading short fiction from the late 1800s and early 1900s, particularly by writers you've never heard of, shows this type of story to have been wildly popular. It took its name from the story The Big Bear of Arkansas by Thomas B. Thorpe, published in 1841 in the Spirit of the Times. Supposedly, William Faulkner thought The Big Bear of Arkansas was a masterpiece. Edgar Allan Poe reviewed the story in 1845 when it was released and called it much overrated and that it seemed to us dull and forced. The term seems to have been invented by historian Bernard de Voto in 1929 to describe a book that wanted to deal realistically with the American frontiersmen of the log cabin species. It was partly a reaction by supposedly uneducated people to a perceived superiority in Easterners or Northerners. De Voto wrote in 1929, "In our time, it has been thought inferior for serious fiction to the serious impairment of farmers in the contemporary Midwest." The Encyclopedia of Arkansas explains that it is the way the character in the story describes his futile pursuit of the beast and its eventual death that made the tale a classic. The story fuses the practice of hunting and the relationship between man and nature on the frontier and the superstitious awe the hunter had for this bear. Scholar Norris W. Yates explains that it is commonplace that one function of the tall tale is to befool a stranger. There is little question that the attempt to bemuse an outsider manifested itself in many a tall tale. An anonymous writer for the Picayune, whose article was reprinted in the Spirit, declared that when men in the South saw the Englishman Frederick Marryat taking notes on American ways, they deliberately sold him, hence the inaccuracies in his Diary in America. Yates calls this a process of self-burlesque, and the Encyclopedia of Arkansas describes that the Big Bear stories are inhabited by clever but uneducated hillbillies. They are trying to trick educated but not clever city folk. Yates wrote of the tall tale duel. If a newcomer could tell a tough yarn to beat that of the next fellow, he thereby proved to the men looking him over with narrowed eyes under coonskin that he was one of them, entitled to their confidence and respect. Thus the tall tale was sometimes a test of fitness, like a contest of marksmanship with a rifle. Thus, whenever outlanders, American or foreign, figure in the tall tales of the Spirit, they are made the dupes of rustic yarn spinners. Always rejecting any outsider's attempt to describe their time and place, as though only they could know anything at all about it, and anyone not them as merely putting on pretenses, observation from without is always meaningless in this type of story. As Poe saw in 1845, someone trying to be clever and not being clever is dull and forced and overrated. We can see the Big Bear tall tale attitude live on in the absurd, immature, and shallow nicknames that President 45 bestows on everyone he doesn't like. For example, Ron DeSanctimonious. And 45's audience loves it. The shallowness is part of the point.